You are listening to the Double Doinkers Fantasy Football Podcast with Nick Meyer and Willie J. This week we bring to you the top 15 wide receivers for fantasy football in 2026. Willie, what is going on, man?
Hey, how's it going, Nick? It's going good.
Oh, yeah, heck yeah. I'm traveling, as you might be able to tell from this different setup behind me. So I'm on my little laptop. There's not actually a desk here. I've got like a glass end table. So if you hear something break mid podcast, that's probably what that is. I'm going to keep pushing through. I'm at a family reunion too, so I apologize if any listeners hear like random yelling or talking loud in the background. That's just my family being weirdos. It's fine. Don't worry about that. But suffice to say, I'm always happy to talk fantasy football. I've had some opportunities to vet some of these opinions with the people around me, and that has been interesting too. But with that said, we're here. We're finally through all of the divisional wrap-ups. If you've listened to those, you're sicko like us. I hope you've enjoyed them. I hope you found some use for them. I have had some feedback that like the shorter episodes has been good for people, so we'll keep it up at that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm excited. I mean, we're starting to get into training camp here too, and you know, it's starting to really feel like the real season is back again, and I'm really excited.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny you mentioned being at a family reunion. I will be at one this weekend on the Oregon coast. I'm looking forward to that. A little time off work.
Heck yeah!
We'll escape from the Portland heat. We got wildfires going on in Washington and Eastern Oregon, so it's been smoky here and hazy. And we got some thunderstorms happening as well today, so it's just kind of all over the place.
You don't really love like thunderstorms and hot heat with wind because that's like potential for just more fires in places.
Yeah, pretty much.
But yeah, I was traveling down from Eugene, so I was going south, and I passed through Medford, and Medford was like blanketed in smoke, and everywhere else has been pretty clear so far. But yeah, it's always a bad old man when one place is blanketed with smoke because that definitely means it's going to travel everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm over here in good old California. It's 100 degrees, and I just remember how hot it is. I'm walking around, I'm just sweating from every pore, and I'm like, you know, you do eventually lose that like heat shield of living in a place. It doesn't stay with you forever.
It's just like, yeah.
I know everyone else is walking around here just normal, and I'm like, oh, I'm dying over here, man. I'm melting to death. My 3-year-old who's never been, you know, in a hot state like California, everywhere he walks, he's just like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. Like, I get you, man. I get you. But here's something I do want to do. I want to talk about the top 15 wide receivers 2026. I also want to talk about news. There's not a lot of news, actually, so I really don't. We'll bring up the news portion of this section as we talk about some of these players because they're really the most pertinent news here is about Puka. And I'm not going to get into that until we talk about Puka.
Yeah.
It's kind of baked into his rankings here. Instead, I want to bring to you the official top 15 wide receivers of 2026 from the Double Doinkers. So get ready for that because you are going to have your mind blown on some of these picks. And I'm just kidding. I mean, look at the list of people out there. You are going to know these names for the most part. You're going to be, you know, ready for these names for the most part. I'll plant my flags in a few places. This isn't our Doinkers episode, but I think you'll probably pick up on who are some pretty important players to each of us here. But let's go ahead and just kind of jump into this thing.
Sweet. My fan's a little on the fritz. Can you hear my fan? Is it blowing? I know it's blowing my tapestry around.
Just a little bit, and behind the curtains for everybody to hear. We can get rid of that in post. Don't worry, it's not a big deal.
All right, sweet.
It's got some cool movement happening. That's what's going on.
Yeah,
it's like the fan. It's the fan that blows Puka's hair into the commercials. He doesn't have commercials because of his actions, but he could have, you know. So our number one fantasy football wide receiver in 2026 should come as no shock to people. This is a guy whose name has been up there. He's on the same team, same coach, same quarterback, same system that we've seen him thrive in the past. And the only reason he may not be ranked number one on some charts is because last year was a down year due to quarterback injury. And that's Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Ja'Marr Chase, in all formats for me, is the clear number one. He's the safest wide receiver, and he has the upside to be number one easily. So that's a good combo. You love safety, and you love upside.
He's got one of the most consistent, not just fantasy receivers of this decade, but maybe excluding Josh Allen and quarterbacks, just the most consistent player. Even in a down year like last year, it was pretty clear why there was some regression, just because of the Jake Browning specifically quarterback play. But consistency is really important for players, especially in a flex spot or for your RB2. But they have that amount of consistency. Not just the big blow up games, but the consistent 20-point plus games he's just honestly a bit of a unicorn.
Mm-hmm. He can catch 12, 15 passes, and make that look like he's an efficiency or a PPR god. But he could also have those games where he catches 5 passes with 3 of them being touchdowns. You can get a blow up on any which way you like, and some of the games are both 12 catches, 150 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then you just win a week single-handedly with one player. I think the upside is just so immense as it has been, and realistically, the downside is, the worst thing that could happen is an injury to Jamar, and I don't think we ever bank on injuries. That's just too random. Good news this year is that Joe Flacco's just there from the beginning. So if Joe Burrow gets hurt again, Joe Flacco comes in, and we saw Joe Flacco. He says, "Hey, where's Burrow? I'm chucking it that way."
Yeah. And we talk about this in the divisional breakdown, but the Bengals offense specifically has such little change from last year compared to virtually every other offense in the league. And, that's important for, consistency and development of players. But when you already have an electric offense with Jamar Chase, not just banking on consistency, but already having that blow up established receiver is really important. They didn't bring any receiver competition, not that he would, be affected by competition, but he still has a very solid wide receiver 2 next to him in T. Higgins. We already know how their dynamic works. So it's really just like a 1-to-1 from last year, the year before that. I think Chase, Nick and I both agreed with him as our number 1 overall wide receiver. There's just really very little downside. Again, Flacco being there from the get-go is a really big boon.
Mm-hmm. Seriously. If you had Jamar during the Flacco part of the season, you were happy still. There was a little bit of talk as, Jamar being a bust in the beginning of the season. It was literally just Jake Browning. You don't have to look further than that. There's nothing deeper than that. Jamar is a slam dunk pick. Easily should be the top wide receiver taken in most drafts, in my opinion.
I've only had it 1 year in my main league, but it was a great year, and I still have a core memory, not even core fantasy memory, but just core memory of that game against the Ravens. And I think it was October, maybe November of 2024. And I was at dinner with my girlfriend, and I just kept getting notifications on my phone. And I thought it was, I know he already had so many points and the game was ongoing, but I just kept getting touchdown notifications. I was like, is this legit? And I looked, and he had 44 points, and I was like, yeah, it's legit.
I love that. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on. Jamar Chase. You know his name. The number 2, and his consensus rank, I will say, isn't his number 1 overall. We get our consensus from Fantasy Pros. They kind of take all the pros, they mash them all together so we can kind of look at our ranks, compare it to their ranks, so we can see if we're real off on some of these players. Jamar, we're not off on. I think everyone probably agrees here. So let's go to our number 2. The Double Doinkers number 2 overall ranked wide receiver, and there's some variation in these choices because Willie and I average them out against each other, but our number 2 ranked is Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I know what you're saying. Oh, but Double Doinkers. Justin Jefferson sucked last year. He was one of the biggest busts in the draft last year. He single-handedly lost me most games last year. He couldn't show up. He couldn't catch a single ball from J.J. McCarthy, right? And it's these things are all true. These things can all be true. And I can still tell you that this year is going to be better. And I think you forget how good Justin Jefferson has been if you look at last year and you say that's it. Because while a lot of the situation is the same, a lot of it has changed, in my opinion, this year. You have quarterback competition. And it's no slouch of a quarterback competition. Kyler Murray is a guy who's taken first overall and had a handful of seasons where it looked like he's going to be the next big quarterback. Pun not intended about his size. I just did think about it after I said it. But now you got J.J. McCarthy and Kyler Murray. So there's a first overall and a 6th overall pick, and they're going to be able to battle it out. J.J. McCarthy had flashes. It wasn't all bad. It was mostly bad, but it wasn't all bad. And you have Justin Jefferson wanting to win for a head coach that's on the hot seat, and Kevin O'Connell. Is it Kevin or is it Kyle? Oh, my God.
It's
It's
Kevin.
Kevin, right? Okay.
Is he a Kyle Shanahan or a McVay disciple? I forget. He's one of them.
Okay, I said it out loud. I'm pretty sure I should trust my gut on this one, but I can't check things. I'm on my laptop instead of my computer, so there's no cross referencing happening here. But anyway, that's the upside case for me is just that he's the same Justin Jefferson. He's catching passes from a quarterback that knows he needs to get Justin Jefferson the ball, regardless if it's JJ McCarthy or if it's Kyler Murray. Like, these are going to be two quarterbacks who need to prove themselves, and they're going to do it to their biggest and best weapon in Justin Jefferson. He's going to eat, and he's going to be the reason this offense comes back to life, in my opinion. Now, I don't know if you have a differing opinion on that, Willie.
Well, I agree, honestly. I mean, so he's your number 2 overall pick, and he's my number 4, but it's close for me, and he's our consensus number 2, and I feel comfortable with that. I think, his year last year, relative to his draft position and just how we know him as a player, was pretty disappointing. He finished as wide receiver 21 overall, which is not a first-round pick. Definitely one of the biggest busts. But with Jefferson, last year was certainly an anomaly compared to his previous seasons, and can't really underestimate J.J. McCarthy's abysmal, what really was his rookie season, and the Max Brosmer, Carson Wentz experiment. Kyler Murray, again, he has not been consistently great since he tore his ACL a few years ago, but he's not been one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league. He was benched last year. That was partially injury. That was partially the Cardinals tanking in a lot of ways. But I do want to reference, and this is obviously not a one-to-one, but something that gets me excited for Justin Jefferson this year is looking at Kyler's best season, again, when he was younger and when he didn't have, pre-ACL tear. But in Kyler's, one of his best seasons was in 2020 when he got an actual legit wide receiver 1, an established wide receiver 1 for the first time. In his only healthy season with an established wide receiver 1, that being DeAndre Hopkins in 2020. That year, D-Hop, who is 2 years older in 2020 than Justin Jefferson is now, finished as the wide receiver 4 overall. And that was his, acclamation into Arizona. That was his first year on the team in a new system. He played in Houston up until that point. And, being 2 years older than Justin Jefferson in a brand new system, with the younger Kyler Murray, he still finished as wide receiver 4 overall. And I just think that, obviously Trey McBride's an incredible tight end, and Marvin Harrison Jr. has been hyped up to be this great, wide receiver 1. But that year of D-Hop in 2020 was the only year that Kyler has been, 1, healthy the whole year, or most of the year, and has had, a legit wide receiver 1. And I think there's just potential in this Kevin O'Connell offense for that to repeat. And that's just an upside comparison, but just enough upside for me is just Justin Jefferson as a player overall. And I really think that last year was an anomaly, and I think he absolutely could bounce back. And I'm really high on him this year.
Yep, I agreed 100%. Now the consensus rate is 6th for Justin Jefferson, and I think that's a lot of recency bias going in there. I really do. I mean, we really shouldn't discount the Max Brosmer and Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz looked okay compared to Brosmer and okay compared to J.J. McCarthy. Look, if J.J. McCarthy's the backup to Kyler, that's a wonderful situation for Justin Jefferson. If J.J. McCarthy has Kyler as a backup, that's a wonderful situation for Justin Jefferson compared to last year. Because we shouldn't forget that J.J. was playing likely hurt the whole entire season as a rookie. He needs to prove himself. Kyler needs to prove himself. Everyone in this situation has extra emphasis to prove themselves, including Justin Jefferson. I just think that level of effort really is going to be there. And I love the story arc in general for Justin Jefferson to pop back up. You don't have to, so I would never recommend doing this. I wouldn't blame you if you took him 1 overall, and I think everyone would call you insane. And I think it would pay off almost.
But if you take him number 1 overall, 2-3 years ago, people wouldn't be saying that. And again, Justin Jefferson as a player has been so consistent outside of last year. And the other thing I do want to note, and obviously Kyler is not an extremely high quarterback upgrade, but Jefferson's never had elite quarterback play in his career. But last year Jefferson scored just 2 touchdowns, and the year before that he scored 10. So if you just add, the extra 8 touchdowns to his team or his season,
it changes, yeah.
he jumps into wide receiver 1 range.
And you have to understand, like, if you watched that season last year, it wasn't all just the quarterback play. Justin Jefferson had a ton of uncharacteristic drops, but I think like the question then becomes like, do you think Justin Jefferson is washed? And I think if your answer is yes, then you're kind of silly here, in my opinion. So
I think it was a chemistry thing. Obviously, it wasn't just with JJ, but I think it was a chemistry thing. And Jefferson hasn't played with the same quarterback his whole career. It's mostly been Kirk Cousins, but he's produced with Nick Collins. But I do think there was a chemistry thing off last year that I don't foresee repeating this year.
Yeah, and I think with the added Juwan Johnson. Oh my God, dude, my brain is like working. Juwan Jennings, yeah, I'm sorry, guys. And I'm sorry, Juwan. You didn't deserve that. With the added Juwan Jennings there, one thing that I think that helps is that they can't really bracket Jefferson the same way. We saw J.J. McCarthy 100% willing to throw to the wide receiver 3 constantly on this team. And if they just leave Juwan Jennings wide open, he's going to really make a pay, so they can't do that. And anyway, I made enough of a case, I think, here. Justin Jefferson's my number 2, and it ends up as our consensus number 2. So let's move on. Consensus number 3. This is a tie, so we let a little bit of randomness dictate who we got as number 3, because there's a tie for these next 2. But number 3 is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. Willie, why don't you start us off with Amon-Ra?
I mean, with Amon-Ra, you can really just kind of repeat what I said about the Bengals' consistency on offense in terms of the receiving core. Obviously there's a lot of variation with the Lions' offense this year. They bring in Drew Petzing from Arizona. They lose David Montgomery. They have a really new O-line, but there has been changes to the Lions over the years, and Amon-Ra has just been the king of consistency. Even in a year like this, where I think there's been more volatility and switch up compared to previous years, there's a case to be made that things could change with Amon-Ra's level of targets and production. But I mean, the Lions faltered on a lot of levels last year, partially due to injuries, but they still had a 9-8 season. And Amon-Ra, going from Ben Johnson to no Ben Johnson, had virtually no change in his game or his level of involvement. And I think that I think Isaac Tesla could be an end zone vulture. As we saw last year, he could build upon that. Jameson Williams is always an incredible deep threat, but yeah, I just think this offense is going to be really prolific yet again this year. And there's just been no comparison, of Amon-Ra having a down year. So you can't point at that and be like, well, it could revert back to this year, because despite, changes to the staff and bringing in players and players leaving, Amon-Ra has just been a wide receiver 1, a high end wide receiver 1 since his sophomore year. So I think that he's a player that I really like combining. If you get him in the mid first round, taking a dart throw on a riskier pick, maybe in the second round, whether that be like a Chase Brown or, maybe someone who isn't as proven as St. Brown, but just one of the safest picks, if not the safest you can make in the first round, I think.
Yeah, and I do have him ranked a little bit higher than you. So I've got him at 3, and you've got him, I think, at 5. Yeah, 5. So here's the hope for Amon-Ra St. Brown for me. The loss of David Montgomery just leads to a higher passing percentage overall in this offense. And Amon-Ra has been able to find seams in the offense that I would imagine leads to a higher touchdown number. And it sounds crazy because Amon-Ra has really great touchdown numbers every season, but I think he could add even a few more. One thing about the Lions is that it always seems like they try to get cute for a while in each game, and they're trying to include everybody in the offense. They'll get the Jameson targets, even if it's not working. They'll figure out how to get Tesla worked in. They'll figure out how to, do all this stuff. And I don't think that they're going to be as willing to get cute after a season where they miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
Every time they call on Amon-Ra, he delivers. And I think they know that. And I think this is the season where they say, okay, we're going to call on you at a very high amount. We lost our bruiser. We can't put it all in Gibbs. I think they want to, but I don't think they can necessarily. That would be a silly decision come playoff time.
Yeah, at least not in terms of receiving in the end zone.
Yeah. Let Amon-Ra be that dog.
Yeah,
and he can be. And if he is, then I think that he has slightly more upside than normal. And like you said, he's been a high end wide receiver every single year, so there's not a lot of reason to see that faltering here.
Yeah, I think that I'm a little bit lower on him. Still in my top 5. I'm a little bit lower on him because I don't think his touchdown numbers are going to increase this year. I think there might be some regression just because we have a healthy Sam Laporta, and I really am excited about the development of Isaac Tesla. However, having said that, I think his role is still going to be so consistent, wherein the Lions are going to have a great offense, and if they're in the 5 yard line on third down, or I mean fourth down with them, they're going to run it with Gibbs. But I think at any point where they're third down, they're on the 10, 15 yard, 20 yard line, and we got St. Brown in the end zone and Tesla in the end zone. I think they both can eat, but St. Brown is that given guy who I think is just going to obviously get a lot of touchdowns in the end zone. But I think he's really just going to stay consistent and be a great pick because of his passing involvement, and his volume specifically. So I see that perhaps increasing, even if touchdowns don't follow. He's going to be so consistent, and I think he's a PPR champion.
Right, and so basically what we're having here is we're discussing this like very minute difference in opinion here, where it's like, yeah, he's going to be great, he's going to be amazing. It's just like, where's his upside, right? I just think he's such a safe pick. It's so easy to put him as 3 because I don't think he finishes far away from that. Like the standard variation's got to be pretty low with him.
What's his consensus on fantasy pros?
4.
Okay, so yeah, right between our picks, and that's kind of just chalk there.
Yeah, well, and I let Google kind of like give me a little bit of a randomizer here. So like then our next pick, which we'll just move on to at number 4 for the Double Doinkers, is JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba of the Seattle Seahawks. So he ends up at number 4. Me and Willie kind of like flip flopped here. So he had JSN at 3. I think I had him at 4. The JSN for me, here's the issue: the player looks amazing. I think he's an amazing player. We've all heard about his skills, including defenders have heard about his skills. The problem is that I think that Seattle does have some question marks, and I'll be the more negative voice here real quick. I'll let Willie come in with the shining bright of happiness. Shining light of happiness, even. If not for the differences of offensive coordinator, I would be much more confident in his game. Fleury was the TE coach for San Francisco, and that group seemed to be well coached and mattered in a lot of different aspects of the game. But it does make me worry about his billion target upside, because who knows if the offense is going to be as focused through JSN. We saw that work, of course, exceedingly well, but I don't think that you want to bring in a whole new offensive coordinator from a different system and have them instill the same system from last year. So I think you could see differences and changes, and it's just that volume going down worries me very little. I'm not talking about a lot. I'm in on JSN, mind you. I love his game. Like he has skills that no other wide receiver has. But that's my variation between 3 and 4.
I think with JSN, I think that I am worried as well about his volume regressing. I think that he's, and this is for better or worse, I think I have him about number 3 overall, but I do think he's going to be consistently more boom or bust this year, and he might lose you some weeks where he would have more consistency. Like if he didn't have a 40-point week, he was still getting you 18 points. Or I could see this year him getting 40 points one week, 9 points the next. Not on a rotating basis, but that being more consistent. But I think that regardless, he's going to average out as one of the top 3 wide receivers in that top 5 range. And I think where I'm seeing his season end, I'm looking at his stats from last year. Obviously, we don't need to talk about those, but his really big breakout with Geno and whoever the offensive coordinator was before Clint Kubiak, I don't recall. I believe Clint Kubiak joined last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you are correct about that. And I can't remember if it was that Walford guy.
Shane, was it? No, it wasn't Shane Waldron. That was the Bears. But anyway, second half of 2024 season is when JSN really broke out in terms of like being a viable wide receiver 1 in fantasy, or starting to look that way. And in that second half of the season before last, he had double-digit points in 7+ games. Ignoring the fantasy championship, he did not have a great season. But in that span, he was. It looks like I might have miswrote this, but either he finished as wide receiver 7 overall for the season, or it was that time span. I think he was wide receiver 7 in points per game the year before last. And that really stemmed from that second half of season breakout. And that was without Sam Darnold. That was about Clint Kubiak. And I really see his season being kind of a mirror of last season mixed with the year before, which is kind of an obvious take. But what I mean by that is I think we're going to see that more boomer bust potential where he's, second half of year before last, he had some huge games and breakouts. He still was not quite that consistent of a player yet. And I kind of see that happening again this upcoming year, which is to say that he's still a great pick. And I think that despite the offensive coordinator change and the unknown and, possibly some Seahawks regression, I think being likely, his chemistry of Sam Darnold is very legit. And that's kind of what I'm leaning on for my overall excitement.
The way he moves is so just smooth. It's insane. The question I have is like, does everyone now having the tape and every single like layperson fan of the NFL understanding how JSN moves, does that actually help the defense key in on him, or is the skill that he has to keep his shoulders low and not show where he's going so great that it doesn't matter that everyone knows what he's doing?
I think it's a little of both. I think those explosive plays where he's able to slip away from defenders on a regular basis might not show up as much. But having said that, I think that he's still going to be looked at so often that he's at least going to get the catch, even if it's not, 8 yards after the catch every time. Some defenders will know to key in. I think his hands are so good, and his contested catch rate is so good that he's at least going to be catching the balls, even if he's not going as far.
Okay, so JSN's consensus ranked number 3. We have him at 4. That's just a bit of a flip flop. It's pretty standard up to here. But I'm going to hit you with the next one, and I'm going to start off with the negatives. I like ending on the positive. It just feels better to me. So at our consensus rank number 5, we're coming in with Puka Nacua. Now, me and Willie have a pretty big difference here. Otherwise, he would probably be a lot higher. But Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams, who, as you may know, was just in the news and is likely to be in the news again in the future, I imagine, for biting his girlfriend. There's a graphic picture online. I mean, it's graphic, but let's be real. If you've been on the internet and you're probably listening to us, you have been on the internet. You can watch it and you're not going to get super grossed out. But it's crazy because it's what is that actor, Armie Hammer, who basically disappeared from the face of the earth?
Because it was like it first leaked as a joke that he's a cannibal, but actually he's like legitimately he might be into that and has a lot of abusive allegations. And Puka's been, obviously biting people would be one thing, but he's had a lot of erratic behavior and just
it's
bad news.
It's exceptionally sad to me because Puka Nacua is one of my favorite players to watch play the game because of the way he plays. So to not be able to root for him as a person hurts. And I also think here's the reason why I'm lower on him. So full disclosure, we have him at 5 consensus. What I have him at is 7. Willie's got him at 2. And I actually don't disagree with Willie's take at all on this. And I think the potential and the skills are set for him to be number 2. But I have him at number 7. The reason is just because this off-season stuff, it's just really giving me pause. I am getting that feeling that drafting Puka suddenly has a lot more risk associated with it. If 2 or 3 more things come out, how long can the NFL ignore all this weird stuff he's doing? It's getting national attention, and there's pictures. You're going to need is a video of him on top of this lady biting her, and then it's over. It's game over, man.
Yeah.
But if it was a pure talent situation, I could argue for the number 1 wide receiver overall. We've seen it, but I'm scared of that risk at that high of a pick. That this is just it's a purely risk mitigation strategy for me to put him at number 7, so he ends up at number 5 on our list. But now, Willie, bring me in the good parts of Puka.
I do say it is unfortunate overall. I was re-listening to our episode from last year a little bit, and we just talked about how great of a cool the guy is and how much we want to root for him, and no mention, no to a large degree his behaviors being public, and he was just still seen as a 5th round draft pick that you blew up out of nowhere and overcame injuries, and so it's really sad to see his public persona. You could either say be tainted or come to light, honestly, but the thing with Puka for me is this news is late breaking with the bite mark. There's another photo that came out that was, as Nick mentioned, very graphic and more detailed than the initial ones that came out in February. With that, though, I think this will be a developing case, obviously. I believe that no charges were filed initially following this. I don't know why these new bite mark pics came out. I don't know if there's a civil lawsuit or if it's going to be investigated legally. But regardless, I think that even with the photographic evidence, there could be a bombshell of more abusive allegations or things that come out. I just think that I can see this case playing out very slowly, and from what we know now and how it's looking and developing, I think it's most likely that Puka won't face any, at the very least, legal charges for this, or possible fines, probation, jail time until after the season, just because of how slowly it's progressed. So I think that the NFL could and should, very likely could take some suspension action against this, but I don't see it happening this season, in my opinion. Especially with how beloved the Rams are, and how Sean McVay, all things considered, seems to have a very good media image and is mostly able to keep things under wraps. And I think with Puka, I think his case, speaks on its own for his stats, and the fact the Rams didn't bring out any competition. It's just him and DeVonta again, and that was prolific last year for fantasy. And they did get better on defense, so that might be more passing, or rather less passing, because I'm higher on their defense this year than their offense, regardless of any Puka thing. So, that could decrease the overall passing volume, but I think that Puka's performance, he's just such a monster after the catch and gets so many touchdowns, even with DeVonta there, that basically I think his stats speak for himself, and I hope this case is investigated further. I just don't have faith in the NFL for any suspensions to come out this year.
And I do agree for the most part with this. Again, all I'm saying is you get that one video, and then the Ray Rice situation all of a sudden comes into light. Or if he does that celebration in the end zone again that he got in trouble for him, that he just learned from Aiden Ross because his brain is like mush, then we're going to have a whole thing.
It's sad. It's really sad. I think he's just really hard to root for, and that's a pretty.
Well, I'm going to say this. If I could place a bet right now, and I'm not sponsored by a betting app, so I'm not going to tell you where, but if I could take a bet right now that says at some point during the season, Puka is going to be on video shooting a dead animal with clavicular,
yeah,
I might take that bet. That's the bad part of this. The dude's gone. Like it just makes the worst decisions for a pro in his place. So,
and just so public, and streamed. It's just a recipe for disaster. I guess the one other reason I might be a little bit higher on Puka, and this is perhaps a positive for fantasy, but a negative because of Puka's actions, but he's not been paid yet, I don't believe. And he is a 5th round draft pick, so he's not making very much money compared to virtually every other player in the NFL. So if he does get a good team on his side and can talk some sense to him and at least convince him with money, then I think that this is a contract year for him, obviously. The Rams could have worked something out this summer, but I think with this news, I don't really see that happening until after the season, honestly, or at least towards the end. So it's a contract year for him, so there's potential for something there, I think, too.
Yep. I don't disagree. So we'll move on. And Puka is consensus ranked number 2, so this is a little bit of a difference. But again, that's on me. Don't blame Willie for that. If Puka's number 2, remember Willie liked him a lot. Okay, it was my issue.
We're making things interesting. You gotta switch it
up. Okay, so our consensus ranked number 6 wide receiver is Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. Drake London, who at this point you clock in at 6, much like in the fantasy football draft, 6 starts to feel where the picks get less interesting. Right? So you hear Drake London and you think, oh, well, we've heard this one before. He's going to catch a bunch of balls and it's going to be great and he's going to be awesome and he's going to get thrown the ball by Penix. And now you got Tua Tagovailoa, and who knows who's going to end up starting between these two and if it even really matters at all. Drake London, however, has shown that he has the skills. He has the ability to just be the number 1 guy, chuck the ball at him in double coverage and come down with it. And who else is there on the Falcons? Kyle Pitts. They paid him a ton of money for his one blow-up game.
He got paid.
Yeah, he did get paid. And look, I'm going to be real. The Falcons, to me, are a team that I don't love to target for my fantasy players at this point, but there are 2. We'll talk about another one on the next episode, I'm sure. But here, it's just that the targets should be there. I think if we're optimistic, he can be efficient with whatever targets he gets. If we're pessimistic, the target percentage can be high enough that it provides a pathway to upside regardless. Like he might only catch 70% of the balls thrown his way, And if it's 180 balls thrown away, that's still going to be a great season. It doesn't matter.
It's a win-win. Yeah, it really is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And both left-handed quarterbacks, at least, so there's consistency there.
Some consistency. I like that. London, for me, I mean, you really summed it up. His season last year, he obviously got hurt. He had the PCL injury, but his performance. I'm pulling up his points here in PPR last year. So he missed several games with the knee injury. He came back and put up 5 points and 1 point. But he was just not the same player. He was still recovering. I don't think he should have come back. The Falcons were barely close to making the playoffs, so that was I think a coaching failure perhaps because he just was not the same player. But before that, he started off the season a little bit slow, but then he had 10, 25, 31, 8, 38, 24, 18. And that's Jamar Chase, nearly Jamar Chase level consistency. He obviously had that one less game where he only scored 8 points, but he put up 25 points with 0 touchdowns. He put up 24 points again with 0 touchdowns. So that volume has been so consistent with him. And obviously we saw it a lot last year. He, I think, averaged 9 targets per game. But that was with both Penix and Kirk Cousins, who's no longer there. And they bring in Tua. And Tua is perhaps washed. But even just 2 or 3 seasons ago, when he had both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, both healthy for the whole season. Tua was healthy the whole season. This is, I believe, 2023. Again, 3 years ago. This is still post-concussion Tua. Both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek, when they were on the field, Jalen Waddle was averaging, just had it here. Jalen Waddle was averaging 7 targets per game with Tua, and Tyreek Hill was averaging 10 targets per game with Tua. So now Drake London had 8 targets per game last year, but Tua is such a quarterback that hyper targets his good players so well. And you look at that offense with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle both healthy the whole year, Tua just chucking it to them consistently. Now you have Drake London, who does not have any significant competition, is like a Tyreek 1A, 1B to Waddle. So, I mean, I'm not saying an average of 14 targets per game is realistic, but with the Falcons being down and wanting to get down the field to get some Bijan Robinson explosive plays off, I just see like Drake London. I think it's very fair to say having the most targeted year of his career, and he's already a player that's thrived on targets and produced it a lot of times. So I see him just being a PPR machine, and perhaps Tua does return to form 3 years ago, and it's even better than that.
Yep, I think well said. I don't think there's a lot of argument either. We have him at 6. He's consensus rank at 7. So Drake London, he's going to slot in there. He's a fantastic pick. I think he's one of the more safe picks if you take a risky pick in the first round and you can get Drake at the beginning of the second. Like, love that for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so consensus rank number 7 for us, for the Double Doinkers, is Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Now, his consensus rank Fantasy Pros is number 9, so we're a little bit ahead on here. Me and Willie have a little bit of a gap. So let me I'll start here with Nico because I love Nico personally. If I'm like a little early here, but if you heard what I believe about the Texans, this may not be a surprise. I think the offensive line upgrades will be a boon for Nico since the plays can develop, and his downfield threat can be more of a significant threat. I could see a great year for the receiver coming. I mean, like we've seen Nico, he can just blow by people. He's a giant physical receiver with such great speed. And if he can finally get through his routes and CJ Stroud can take a second to let it all develop and he's not just getting bum rushed right from the beginning of a play, it doesn't matter how many people are Nico. Nico comes out with the ball. I love Nico Collins this year. I was a little bit down on him last year, and I think he provided okay. This year I'm up on him, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, Nico, he is a player that I think was kind of forgotten a bit last year. He still finished. I forget his overall finish, but he was still very consistent, and he had a handful of top 5, top 10 wide receiver for the week finishes throughout the season. And he didn't have very many. He had, a few dud games here and there. And by dud games, I mean like 9 points instead of 19. But he had some blow-up games, and I am very, very high on this Texans defense. And I think that the offense will get better from last year with the offensive line upgrades. I'm not dead set on saying CJ Stroud's going to return to his rookie year form, but I think he will get right and get a little bit better with the better offensive line. And I think with Nico, people have talked about, having the year two players, Jalen Noel, Jalen Noel, and Jaden Higgins breaking out, and Tank Dell coming back, and that perhaps being a threat to Nico's overall volume. But I would definitely argue against that and say that them, developing as players is only a benefit for Nico, because I don't see them having this huge leap in this offense to, having in this offense specifically. I don't see any of those players having this huge leap to like wide receiver one status as a receiver. I just can see them developing into, solid wide receiver twos and threes in the NFL that will take the defensive pressure off of Nico and allow him to, get more receptions and be less of a focal point, or less of a target for the defense to have as a focal point, and they can like spread the ball around a little bit more. Because I think we've seen Nico really have great weeks and consistent production when he's not the only one out there doing things. And it also helps his overall injuries too.
Yeah. We saw him as a wide receiver one overall for the first like 6 or 7 weeks of the year 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When he had Tank Dell operating with him, and I think it was Brandon Cooks as well. There's a third receiver in there somewhere. I can't remember exactly who. And he had a Joe Mixon, So we had David Montgomery to this offense, and I really think that like just a better offense around with the Texans and the offensive line is going to open up the game a lot more. I mean, Nico can score touchdowns. He's big. He's physical. He can score touchdowns if he's given the opportunity. And the Texans, like, watch any Texans game last year. I dare you to watch their offensive highlights. They're not good. They're not good because their offensive line sucks. They have no running game, and Nico's the only target. And he still can catch the ball and do things with it. He's a great receiver.
Yeah, I think that he's become a bit underrated. I was a little bit lower on him last year, and he kind of performed around the expectations I had, but he still had a very consistent year. And, there's some pushback also with him having some injuries in the past, but I think I finally come around and not started labeling him as injury prone in my mind, at least, because looking at his season 2 years ago, he did not have any dud weeks. He was consistently, like you mentioned, wide receiver one overall the first few weeks of the year, and then he got injured. He came back. He had one game with double digits, and then every single other game he had 14 plus points for the rest of the season. So that there's just a level of consistency there that I think that even if he doesn't explode into this overall wide receiver one, top three receiver, we still know what we got from him, and I think he's going to deliver this year.
I love it. I just, for some reason, the Texans are a team I like talking about right now. They feel just like a lot of optimism behind him. So he's consensus rate Fantasy Pros number 9. I think I said that earlier. So let's move on. Now the next double Doinkers pick at 8 is Cedee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. I know if there's a Cowboys fan listening, they're sitting there going, well, why didn't you say his name earlier? He is Fantasy Pros consensus rank 5. And Willie, this time I'd like to let you go first with Cedee Lamb.
Yeah, so with Cedee Lamb, there's two big things here. One, or at least in my view, there's the, I think, positive regression from last year, wherein he's not dealing with an injury this year, and he's going to score more touchdowns. However, I think the limit there is that with Pickens on the field, that positive regression can only go so far, in my opinion. So wide receiver 5 is a little rich for me, at least in comparison to the other players around him that I like more. He's still my wide receiver 7 overall, and I think when it comes to Cedee Lamb versus George Pickens, I am higher in Cedee this year, not inherently at that mid first round price tag. But what I do like about Cedee is really just that chance for positive regression. So in fantasy points per game last year, Cedee still finished as wide receiver 10, and I think that's pretty worth noting because Pickens was healthy all year, and obviously they vultured touchdowns from each other. But what really struck me about Cedee was that he was consistently more consistent than George Pickens in the games that he played and finished. I'll rattle it off here. He had 22, 14, 15, 17, 11, 24, 18, 17, 11, 10 points. So clearly lacking those big George Pickens blow-up games, but did not have the dud down weeks like Pickens had at times. And with all of that, Cedee only had 3 touchdowns. And the year before that, his big, huge, mega breakout year, he had 4 big blow-up games with 25-plus points. And he only had 1 of those last year. But the reason behind those big blow up games 2 years ago and the reason behind those big blow up games for Pickens last year was that Cedee Lamb had 9 touchdowns 2 years ago, and last year he had 3. That's a lot of numbers being thrown around, but basically, the positive regression for touchdowns I think is going to be very apparent for Cedee, and I think that judging him off his first year playing opposite another alpha like Pickens and having that injury isn't enough to really see him as an overall regression candidate. I think last year was just a down year for him, and I think that he can come back from that.
No, that's totally fair. So like I've got him at 10, which is just a little bit lower than this, but I've actually got George Pickens higher than him. So spoiler alert for who we'll talk about coming up soon. For me, I think there's something that happens when I look at Cedee Lamb, and I saw kind of he led the league in drops, but a lot of those drops were super costly to the team. Now, of course, they're not going to go away from Cedee Lamb, and he is still like a top 10 wide receiver for me. But what I worry about with him is he should still be the guy who gets a ton of targets for the Cowboys, especially in clutch moments. We see them hyper target him in clutch moments in the past. And if he starts to seed, see what I did there? Seed. You just take out 2 E's and you got seed. Anyway, if he starts to seed some of those targets, I think his overall upside goes down just a bit because that hyper targeting of Cedee Lamb really provides a boon. Like I do agree that his touchdown numbers are like prime positive regression candidate. He's not going to score just 3 again. But my thought here is that with George Pickens being in his second version of contract year, what's to stop if Cedee Lamb comes out the gate and drops 2 passes in the beginning of the season? What's to stop them from going, you know what? Let's give George these. Let's see what George does if he can finish this off and do the same and do better with the same
that
thing.
Contract year too, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But overall, not a bad pick either which way. We're a little bit lower than consensus as it stands. Cedee Lamb is top 5 in consensus, and that's too rich for me. I don't like the competition to targets between him and George Pickens enough to put him as a top 5.
Yeah, it's hard for like me with like someone like Puka and DeVonta. DeVonta's not quite George Pickens in terms of overall receiver. He's a touchdown vulture, but if you're looking at those 1A 1B with Puka and DeVonta, they can coexist quite well, and I feel fine taking Puka in the top 5 personally, or around that range. But with Cedee, like him and George Pickens, they just play similar levels of the field at times. And even though we saw a lot of consistency from Cedee last year, even with Pickens there, I think that him coming back fully healthy and getting more touchdowns, I do see him kind of having that more Pickens role this year, where he does have some more disappearing games. So, isn't that boomer bust range? And at wide receiver 5, there's just players I like more around that.
And so let's go ahead and let's just talk about the other Dallas Cowboy wide receiver now. So at Double Doinkers rank number 9, we have George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. He's a consensus rank 10, so we're not really different on that here. But me and Willie have a fair gap between our rankings of George Pickens. So I have him at number 8. Willie's got him at number 10. I said fairly large, is 2 spots. Who cares? But I'll start with George Pickens. So this is my hot take, is I'm putting Pickens over Lamb. But I think what I saw last year, mixed with the contract issues Pickens has, leads me to believe that we're going to see him going hard again to get paid. And if the Cowboys players understand what this sort of contract situation looks like for Pickens, where he's kind of being held hostage by the Cowboys, they might work hard for him to get paid. And for that team feels like a team that might work hard for him to get paid.
Yeah. Or else you're going to get Wisconsin, which...
Yeah, exactly. There's some good options from there. I don't like taking players who are going to get traded, but that could happen. Actually, there's a realistic version of this where he does get traded. But anyways, the Cowboys should lock him up soon. I wish that they would. Jerry doesn't seem to be able to do that because he likes to spend more money than he needs to by waiting until the end of the season. If they were really dedicated to this duo, you would see George Pickens signing a contract in training camp before the season. And if that happens, I don't know if it would excite me or make me more worried about his season. George Pickens is an interesting character. But as far as right now, from what I'm seeing, this contract year for George Pickens in a odd situation where I wouldn't want to be in it if I was George, I think he's going to do phenomenal. And I think that there's going to be maybe less consistency than Cedee Lamb has. But I think the upside and the way George Pickens plays, I'm more excited for it, realistically.
It's hard not to be, just because of what we saw last year with some disappearing games, but like there's just some huge blow up games, and I don't think that was a fluke. And it's hard for me. I am higher on CD as a player, but the consensus with CD at 5 and Pickens at 10 is just a little too rich for me, because that means Pickens is going around later, and I think both of these guys have baked in risk. So when you're asking me who I'd rather draft, I'd rather have CD on my team. Who would I rather draft? Around later, I'd rather have George Pickens. So it really depends on your league and what your other players in your league value. But if your league usually goes running back heavy, that 5 to 10 wide receiver gap, that's a whole round in a lot of leagues. So that's a good reason to lean Pickens. I think just my main argument really with Pickens is that having those blow up games, he had 5 games of 25 plus points per game, including 2 of 33 plus points. But then when CD came back from injury, he had 3 games below single digits, while CD had 0 games below single digits. And I think one, if not both, of those big blow-up games did come when CD was back from injury. So, it kind of goes both ways. But it's the boom or bustness of it for me. But if he's there in the second round, as my wide receiver 10, I still like him quite a bit.
So yeah, like team comp in my mind, if like you're sitting in the middle of the rounds, right, is you could either have Cedee Lamb and, let's say, Chase Brown, or you could have Ashton Genty and George Pickens, and
I would take the Ashton Genty upside with the Pickens, boom or bustness.
I think with the way running backs are this year, and we'll talk, of course, more about that in our next episode, it makes more sense to gamble on the lower rated wide receiver that has the upside. But it's splitting hairs. I mean, you get these guys on your team, like if you're set on one over the other, there's not a lot of difference. We have them 8 and 9, so
yeah,
pretty close. Let's move on to another NFC East wide receiver. We are going to. Oh shoot, he's not an NFC East wide receiver anymore. See, I automatically did that. Oh, he is an AFC East wide receiver now, and he is rank 10 for the Double Doinkers, and I am, of course, talking about A.J. Brown of the New England Patriots. He reunites with Mike Vrabel over in Boston, New England, and he gets to catch passes from Drake May. Realistically, there's a lot of reasons to think that he's got an upgrade here, but do we think that his upgrade is enough to kind of take away from his dismal season last year with the Eagles, an offense that had clicked multiple times beforehand and then had a complete fallout? A.J. Brown scares me as a player, and I think he always will scare me as a player because he seems very temperamental, and you have to hope that it all works out. But for me, with A.J. Brown, and I've ranked him at 11, it's not his talent or attitude that worries me the most. What worries me the most is the spreading of targets and the amount the team would like to run the ball in New England.
Yeah. It's really, it's a similar, obviously different offense. Sorry, similar. It is different. But if you look at the makeup in Philadelphia, it's, in theory with Saquon Barkley, it's a run-first team. New England was very much a run-first team last year, even with how prolific Drake May was passing. He got a lot of his, fantasy points on the ground. So they did a lot of running of the ball last year. And obviously there was a crowded receiving room in Philadelphia, but the room in New England is even more crowded. And I think with A.J. Brown, a lot of his down year from last year was attributed to his injury. But it was a hamstring injury, and he's on the wrong side of 30 at this point, I believe. So you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what is the difference between, and again, not player comparison, but like, what's the difference between A.J. Brown with a hamstring injury and Devontae Adams, who's just a couple years older and is, maybe on a better offense, also dealing with hamstring injuries? I think that the new team dynamic for a player like A.J. Brown is just less rosy for me than it was a few years ago when he came to Philadelphia, because that was clearly an offensive upgrade. I think New England to Philadelphia is a little bit more even, and I think that just looking at how often Drake May spread the ball around last year and was successful with it, I just don't see them like hyper targeting A.J. Brown just because he's the number one there. Because remember, they also brought in Romeo Doubs, and he's not the player that A.J. Brown is, but at times he was wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, And he's also coming from a team that spread the ball around a lot. And I think that they're signing a Romeo Dubs suggests that they're still wanting players that maybe can't be an alpha, but are still going to be like a key part of the offense. And in AJ Brown's case, I think that's just not overusing him because of his hamstring and injury and age. I think that the Patriots would be wise to have AJ Brown be a key weapon, but not the hyper targeted receiver that some fantasy analysts are hoping he'll be. I think he'll just be very consistent, but the upside for him there is not for me.
Yeah, I agree with this. It's like it's a weird fit to me because the Patriots had a lot of success with this wide receiver by committee that we've talked about multiple times, and AJ Brown seems like the player that's least likely to be okay with the wide receiver by committee. But here he is, he's here, and this is a team that had the success. So, which rock moves first? Is it the one that had the success of going to the Super Bowl, or is it the guy who just got kicked off his team because he was so cancerous? The thing with AJ Brown for me is that we've seen this. Stephon Diggs, who's no slouch of a wide receiver, was on the same team last year, and of course we can say that he wasn't physically the same guy as AJ Brown is now.
Yeah,
but there's not. I would halt and say there's not really a lot to necessarily suggest exactly that. Stephon Diggs, however, was used, but he was just part of the wide receiver by committee. He ended up being the alpha of it, but we kind of saw his upside capped, and that's just where I am with AJ Brown. There's not a ton of upside. Like, for me, this double digit, like 10, 11, 12, that's his upside.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole thing. It doesn't get higher than that. A good season, don't be shocked, but there's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for him. I don't see it in any way.
I see AJ Brown in this offense in particular as a younger version of Stephon Diggs that upside comes from a handful of really big boom games, and then also the inconsistency we saw from Diggs, the injury potential, and games where he puts up 2 points. I don't want to bank on injury history, but with the hamstring, it gives me some pause, especially on a team like New England that's smart and probably isn't going to overutilize him because they don't have to.
So, let's move on to another wide receiver that is just an interesting person to rank. I'm going to talk to you about our number 11 double doinker consensus pick, Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. Consensus, he's ranked 11. We're just locked in with them. I'm going to start off with just reading the first Google blurb that comes up when I type in Rashee Rice suspension, okay? So Rashee Rice will not face a suspension to start the season. The league has concluded its investigations into his off-field allegations, including the domestic violence claims and the 2024 car crash. Okay, so we're good to go there. However, Rashee Rice has already missed the early stages of the Kansas City's 2026 offseason program because of a 30-day stint in the Dallas County jail for probation violation. And he had another surgery. So what do we know? The Chiefs are going to get away with whatever they want. That's been clear for as long as Mahomes has been there and blowing up things up, right? Like they're the face of the league. We want them to be the face of the league. Keep Rashee Rice in there. And look, I'm the biggest Chiefs hater in the world. Okay, Rashee Rice gets a ton of targets. He knows how to use them, and Mahomes will lean on him when he needs to. Rashee Rice has all the upside. And the dang world of someone whose ADOT is like 5 yards.
Yeah.
But what a headache he could turn out to be at any time. You just don't know. Like, I don't understand how this keeps happening.
It's every year, like where he both meets, or rather, he surpasses expectations and he falls below them. It's like he never meets them. It's like, wow, he even he's even better than we expected him to be in these games, and then he does something stupid, and then it's like he's not playing or he's hurt. Like, this is even worse. And then that just kind of evens out for him to have a solid, respectable finish. We haven't seen that year where he's been fully healthy and fully sane.
It just hasn't happened. My thought about this is with like Kansas City and Rashee Rice in particular, the big worry for me fantasy wise at this point, because we know what we have, I think, as you said, it's exactly right. What if another wide receiver actually manages to emerge in this group and show up as a consistent threat? I think that can't help Rashee, can only hurt him.
Specifically because he thrives on the volume.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the involvement in the game itself. It's the volume of passes he gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my big worry with Rashee Rice, and it's not really playing out in this ranking because I this group of Kansas City wide receivers sucks, but there is this like background worry that if someone emerges, it could hurt him.
It's tricky for me. It's but for Rashee Rice, like if you ask me, would I consider him to be skill level a top 20, maybe 25 receiver in the NFL? No, he's not. But he's so perfect for this Andy Reid offense, specifically in fantasy, that he's such a great fantasy asset when we've seen him on the field. He's not a great receiver. He just works great in the system. And there's been criticisms of other players like, I mean, Cooper Kupp, obviously in the McVay system was incredible. I think he would have been great anywhere else, but not to that level of the McVay system. And it's the same with Rashee Rice. Not a comparison to Cooper Kupp had that season, but it's Rashee Rice is just so great in this Andy Reid system. He's not a great receiver, or really seems like a great person. But I think that with the NFL at least coming out and saying that their investigation is concluded for this year, it really just hedges on, is he going to do something else stupid? Really, it's nothing that he's done. Like last year we were talking, I was confident he wasn't going to get suspended, and he was suspended, but it was for something he'd already done that was stupid. This year it's now we're waiting on him to do something else stupid, but it seems like, okay, stupid stuff he's already done.
We're good on
for that. Yeah. So that's at least the positive in fantasy.
Yeah. I mean, his game reminds me of like if Jarvis Landry was ever on a good offense that was like really clicking, Jarvis Landry could be this dude,
Yeah.
No one in Kansas City is going to be that guy who emerges. I just can't imagine it really. So that's why I still have him pretty high. But
Yeah.
God, can you imagine if Tyquan Thornton all of a sudden became a deep threat and Mahomes could chuck it deep again? Rashee Rice might completely change. Like the touchdown numbers go down because Mahomes is chucking it deep. I don't like to imagine this, by the way. This doesn't feel good.
It's hard. It's funny because I don't see him being like the number one wide receiver in fantasy. That would shock me. But if he is healthy and he's not suspended, like top 5 finish, absolutely. And that's why he kind of just falls in his low end wide receiver one for me. Just because at this point, it just is not a fluke because he's come back from an ACL tear. He's come back from time missed, and he's still been that consistent, like, just catch machine. So it really hinges on his behavior and, still having that volume. It's hard to not get excited about him when he's good.
Yeah, this is fair. Okay, the next one, I'm going to let you start off, Willie. I'm going to announce him, but then you take it off, okay? Our consensus ranked number 12 with Double Doinkers is the Consensus Fantasy Pros ranked number 18. So this is a little bit of a leap here for you. And it is Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. Willie, why is Ladd so high in your rankings?
This is a high one. This is a player that disappointed a lot of people who took him late second, early third last year. So with Ladd McConkey, in our divisional breakdown, I basically talked up Mike McDaniel to the moon. Clearly, he's a big part of why McConkey's so high for me. The other piece here is, McConkey's big rookie year was without Keenan Allen. They're not similar types of players per se, but they both thrive in the slot. And when they're both on the same team, there's some target competition that can really hinder or hurt the other. But Keenan Allen is not there right now. Mike McDaniel is in. And with Ladd, I think that he was just on this trajectory after his rookie year where he finished as wide receiver 15 overall, and that was despite only getting double-digit points once in his first 6 games as a rookie. I didn't pull up the exact stat here, but I believe he was like wide receiver 10 or 9 or 8, somewhere in there in the second half of the season on a points-per-game basis. So that was a clear trajectory right there of ascending to a wide receiver 1 type player. And he was just had marks of consistency where he had, occasional blow up games, and then just double digit points consistently, getting looks from Herbert. They had a great chemistry. He still finished as wide receiver 29 last year, despite playing through injury. There wasn't a whole lot of talk about the extent of his injury. He didn't, I think he missed a couple of games, but mostly he was just playing through injury. Again, it didn't really come to light exactly. It was a hamstring foot thing. But clearly, yes, last year was just a down year. But they bring in a new offensive coordinator, and specifically an offensive coordinator where their MO with quarterback is to get their receivers, their best receivers hyper targeted. We saw that with Waddle and Hill, and with a run game as well in Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert in Miami under Mike McDaniel. So I'm very excited about the Chargers run game, but I think that McConkey's still the clear wide receiver one on this team, and he's still going to eat in terms of touchdowns. And I think he's just going to be a very, very consistent player, the kind of guy that is, not going to like win you a league, but if you have him as your wide receiver one, I think that he's going to be solid and consistent, and you're going to get him late. Just one of my favorite picks to make this year. I think that there's really little downside because of what he could function in as his offense, and his competition from the tight ends in the end zone and getting touchdowns is there. But outside of Trey Harris and an ascent from Oronde Gadsden, there's no clear target hog in terms of his skill set on this team. So I think that Ladd's just one of those players that's going to be super consistent, and he also could have games like he did in the playoffs a couple of years ago where he put up 2 touchdowns, not in the fantasy playoffs but in the real life playoffs, because him and Herbert just have that connection. And I'm really excited to be high and hopefully right on McConkey this year.
I don't disagree with a lot of what your takes, and I know Mike McDaniel is the offensive coordinator for the Chargers. Here's my only water on the situation with Ladd McConkey here, and that is that I think Quentin Johnston's being a little unrecognized for what he did and kind of his turnaround last season.
I said Oronde Gadsden. I meant to say Quentin Johnston, but yes.
I mean on Oronde, but that's for different reasons. But Quentin Johnston, I think, has this opportunity to potentially ascend and become a wide receiver one for this offense. And that's not what I'm predicting. It's just the one scenario where I see Ladd McConkey not necessarily living up to a wide receiver one finish in fantasy next year. But with that said, Mike McDaniel's offenses have supported 2 wide receivers in the past. That's not like this is such a volatile situation, and there's really no surety that Quentin Johnston can have a full season where he's actually consistently good. That's not really a thing that we can bank on at this point. That's just my only chief worry. Mike McDaniel's the sort of guy who I could see completely coming in and switching up this offense. Lag should be a part of that regardless.
Yeah, I think so. The one other knock I have on him that gives me some pause is that he has been dealing with a hamstring injury, but he's expected to make training camp, and it's nothing that's been torn. I think it's probably just a rest thing. Not much has come out, similar to last year. So there's some concern there. And I agree with the QJ ascent being a possibility, and I do like that for this offense and see it as a possibility. I think that Ladd's game, again, he's not the most dynamic receiver in the world, but I really have high hopes for him in fantasy because of what he does in the slot. And QJ could be going downfield and have some incredible plays and score more touchdowns even, potentially. But I think that Ladd is just going to thrive so much in the slot and be Herbert's go-to guy there. And with Keenan Allen out of his team, there's just no competition. He's just going to be that guy, and that I view as being just a huge path to supreme consistency.
There's a little bit of a jump there for us in the consensus rankings for us as opposed to everyone else too. So there might be value to be had in picking him where he's going, which isn't always true of a lot of these top wide receivers. A lot of these top wide receivers are paying the price, and you're just getting what you wanted or you're not. Meanwhile, Ladd, you can pay a discounted price and get someone even better. Okay, let's go to our next one. Our double doinkers rank 13. We have DeVonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. That is also the Fantasy Pros consensus rank. So now DeVonta Smith is in an interesting place, but Willie, you've talked more about him through our NFC East write-ups. Do you think, for me, question with DeVonta Smith when it comes to Michael Lemon? Shoot, dude. Okay, again, I can't look at my notes right now, so it's a whole thing. I'm sorry. I have the last names memorized. The first names are iffy with these rookies. It's Mackay, isn't it?
It's Mackay, yeah.
Dang it, just trust the gut. Okay,
yeah.
So the drafting of Mackay Lemon means he doesn't exactly get the receiver core to himself, but he does get the opportunity to work with an offensive coordinator and a system that it absolutely just has to feature the pass. They got to show that it was Kevin Patullo that was holding them back. that it wasn't Nick Sirianni, that it wasn't Jalen Hurts, that it wasn't, losing the Kelsey dude from their offensive line. They have to show that this offense can pass the ball. It is going to be so important. Otherwise, the people of Philadelphia will eat them alive. And if they do, DeVonta Smith has to be the guy who benefits from that the most, right? There's just no other name. Like Mekhi Lemon, he could be great, but DeVonta Smith should be great.
Yeah. That's the thing. It's appropriate, I think, that DeVonta Smith, his entire career opposite A.J. Brown, has been talked about, as a high-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 that's wide receiver 2 on his team. And, a wide receiver 2 in fantasy that has those boom or bust weeks. But now I think it's appropriate that he's wide receiver 13 because that's the highest wide receiver 2 spot you can be. And that's really what I view him being this year. We've talked about the stats of DeVonta Smith's targets and, overall fantasy points when A.J. Brown's not on the field. And obviously, A.J. Brown's not there. They obviously, did bring in Mekhi Lemon, which will take away some targets. But I think that DeVonta Smith is so already established on this offense. And like you said, an offense that needs to really prove itself. I think leaning on him, especially in close games, will be successful because we know what he is and what he produced in college and, in games in the NFL, like in the Super Bowl and games when A.J. Brown went down, he showed up. He was able to be that wide receiver 1. He was able to sustain that role and produce with it. So I'm not afraid of the target competition from Mekhi Lemon. I think that Smith will be the number 1 here. My only reason I'm not higher on him overall, but could see him finishing higher, is just that there's some changes to this team this year. New offensive coordinator yet again. Brown's gone. I think there could be some, a period where there's some adjustment where Smith might not gel completely right away, but I think you will not regret drafting him, and I think he's going to produce, especially where he's being taken now around the 3rd round. I see a path to consistency and some upside too.
Wonderful. We'll move on. We're almost at the end of here with our 15, but the next one is one I'm excited to talk about. So the Double Doinkers consensus ranked number 14 wide receiver is actually DJ Moore of the Buffalo Bills. So he is Fantasy Pros ranked number 25, and we're consistently high. I'm going to go ahead and just start off here saying that if you've heard us talk about the Buffalo Bills and the AFC East right up, you understand like where we're coming from with DJ Moore. But I just don't see a world in which he's not going to be a slam dunk pick. He's going to be a slam dunk pick. I'm all in on Buffalo's version of DJ Moore. They traded for him, and I don't think the efficiency of the run game in Buffalo will be infinitely repeatable. DJ Moore is exactly the dude they've been wanting and they've been trying to draft forever. And there's no reason to not run the passing game through him. I think that they want to get great things from him, and I personally expect great things from him this year. For value-wise, screaming value for me. I actually have him as wide receiver 9 on my list here because I am really in on DJ Moore this year.
DJ Moore, I'm not quite there with him. He's, I believe my wide receiver 19 or 18, but that range of wide receiver 14-ish to 21-ish for me, they're all, consensus wide receiver 2s. DJ Moore, if he's your wide receiver 2, particularly like you said, based on his value where he's being drafted, I feel comfortable with that and excited. And you can pretty easily get him where he's going now as your wide receiver 3 and still have other players around him at running back to make a great team. So he's one of my favorite value picks for sure. I think with DJ Moore, people might point to his points last year on Chicago. But I do want to say it wasn't a down year for him per se. It's just that he was playing with actual competition in Chicago for the first time in his career there. And, he didn't have a lot of great competition in Carolina either. So it was his most competitive year in terms of players on the field around him. And he really just disappointed because of his boom or bust games. Obviously, as a Bears fan, I know he had some really boom games. But DJ Moore is not the type of player that has missed time. He's not injury prone. He's not shown any signs of slowing down. It's just he was utilized less last year. And like you mentioned, the run game is a big factor in Buffalo, but Buffalo has not had a really solid wide receiver 1 since Diggs left. And I think that they have just come so close to the Super Bowl year after year that they're going to relish an opportunity to have a wide receiver one back in town that they can rely on in closer games. And I think there's some risk baked into DJ Moore just overall because of his age and being new in the offense and the run game. But at his price, like I have him as a high to mid wide receiver too. Like I said, he could raise a little bit, but he's not going to raise up to this level where I think he will finish. So there's just very little risk in terms of where he's being drafted, and he's a discount AJ Brown in a similar kind of situation changeup, but would much rather have DJ Moore at his value.
Yeah, and like I said, he's my wide receiver 9. So even if I'm looking at a team where I draft, let's say like, I don't know what running back, a round 1 running back, follow it up with the tight end in round 2, and then DJ Moore ends up as my wide receiver 1 overall in round 3. I'm personally okay with that. Like if you build it up a strong enough team, I really think that we've seen Josh Allen with a wide receiver 1. It does work. Like there's not a theory on this. It works. Diggs has shown that it works. However, they haven't been able to find the guy to do that. I mean, we've seen Gabe Davis try to be that dude. We've seen Khalil Shakir try to be that dude. We've seen Keon Coleman try to be that dude. Sorry, as soon as I say Keon Coleman's name, I think about the general manager. It's just a whole different issue. DJ Moore could be that dude. We've seen him do it on bad teams. We haven't really seen him do it on great teams. Chicago, I feel like he was the odd man out because Ben Johnson comes in. He has an idea already in place. And he starts bringing in the players to make that idea work. And see DJ Moore's just standing there going like, what about me, coach? And he's like, man, yeah, I guess. What about you, brother?
He was the 4th or 5th option on that team at times, especially later in the year. And that wasn't really because he was washed. It just the way the often functioned without him. He wasn't a necessity where Buffalo traded for him.
Mm-hmm. And that's to me the big difference. Like we saw when in Chicago was like, okay, we're gonna throw you a bone, DJ. We get it. You need to be used. You're a player. We care about you. We want everyone to be involved. And he pops off out of nowhere because if they're like, it's your game. Let's go, DJ Moore game. And he's like, yeah, I showed up and I did the thing and I did great at it. So I'm maybe even unrealistically excited about this. I have him at wide receiver 9 overall. He's someone that I really, really want in most of my drafts. So stop listing people from my league, please, right now. We'll move on to our last of our top 15 here. And the last player on the top 15 is Tetairoa McMillan from the Carolina Panthers. Consensus ranked number 15 for both us and the Fantasy Pros, so this is kind of a pretty chalk pick. For Tet, my whole thought is that he had a pretty good rookie year. He showed a lot of the traits you want to see in a receiver that's going to be really like solid, steady, productive. And I expect him to just keep growing on that. I see that if he continues an upward trajectory, he's just going to get better. I don't necessarily love the Panthers as a team that can produce a top 5 wide receiver, a top 10 wide receiver. But I think they can produce a top receiver, so he slots in at number 15.
Yeah, and I think with McMillan here, I think that I looked up, he obviously was a rookie last year, and the Panthers were down a lot of games, so they relied on him. He finished as wide receiver 16 in PPR. So he had a very solid, season overall, especially for a rookie. So if you assume that at wide receiver 15 he's being drafted at his floor, I think that's a fair, risk to take, especially if the Panthers stall and we've seen his peak. That's still, solid enough value there. I think that Jalen Coker is a much better value just because him going so late and him having such a late season breakout and chemistry of Bryce Young. But that notwithstanding, they didn't bring in a lot of competition from McMillan to be a 1A to somebody's 1B. I think that Coker could potentially become a 1B or at least a high 2. But McMillan is their offense right now. He's the focal point. And I think that if Bryce Young doesn't regress horribly and McMillan just repeats what he did last year, he's a solid pick where he's going now.
Agreed. This is one of those picks that I don't think is super flashy when you make it right now, and it feels like it should be because the second-year player, one of the highest drafted receiver of his draft class, that should scream high potential upside. But just what we saw in Carolina, I think, feels just super safe more than anything.
Yeah. When the Panthers trade for Lamar Jackson next year, then that's when McMillan's going to be a big fantasy asset.
When Josh Allen finally goes somewhere else to the Panthers and wins the Super Bowl. I'm still predicting he goes to the Eagles and wins the Super Bowl. That's my actual like dark horse prediction, but that's in like a couple years.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I can see that.
I don't know. There's a lot of
The
moving
Chiefs.
parts in
He
that.
goes to the Chiefs after Mahomes retires.
Oh, God, man. Sick of here for a second. Okay, so that's our top 15. And I'll list them here real quick just in case you're only listening to this part. So our number 1 is Jamar Chase. Our number 2 is Justin Jefferson. Our number 3 is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Our number 4 is JSN. Our number 5 is Puka Nacua. Our number 6 is Drake London. 7, Nico Collins. 8, Cedee Lamb. 9, George Pickens. 10, A.J. Brown. 11, Rashee Rice. 12, Lad McConkey. 13, DeVonta Smith. 14, DJ Moore. 15, Tetairoa McMillan. So write those down. You got them here. I think it's going to be a solid number. Now, there's a few names that we didn't talk about here that we won't really get in depth about. Chris Olave, he's consensus ranked number 12 on Fantasy Pros. We have him at 16, so not super far off. I just think there's like some differences of opinions on the level of involvement of Jordan Tyson for me is the deal.
And HN for me, Travis HN for me. Olave being drafted at his ceiling right now gives me pause because there's weapons that came in that will compete for those targets.
Mm-hmm. Garrett Wilson at 14 on Fantasy Pros is 20 for us. Garrett Wilson, meanwhile, I can't remember who has him higher, me or you. I have him at 20 and you have him at 22, so I actually have him higher. Look, I'm a Raiders fan, okay? I watched Geno Smith last year. Garrett Wilson is a better target than anyone on the Raiders except for Brock Bowers. I still don't see that there's going to be enough fire. There's just not enough in this team to make me believe, and he has actual target competition with a new quarterback that sucks. That's bad combo, bad gumbo.
This is the thing for me. It's hard because I want to be higher on him because I think that he was great last year and then he got injured. But this is the most target competition he's had. He's got 2 first-round rookies coming in. He's not had any target competition his whole career. And Adonai Mitchell showed some flashes. So I think the days of him, at least this year, him being a target hog are not going to repeat. So that's why I'm a little lower.
Mm-hmm. Zay Flowers, the Baltimore Ravens, he's consensus 16 on Fantasy Pros. We have him at 24, so we're low on Zay Flowers. I can't enjoy any part of Baltimore that's happening right now. It's just bad vibes, weird. Not necessarily weird decisions, but decisions that I don't think are going to help the chemistry and makeup of this team. And Zay Flowers is, to me, like the way he plays, doesn't scream as like a wide receiver 1 archetype that can take over a whole season. He's going to just keep being boom or bust, in my opinion.
He would do great on a team like the Bengals with it was Jamar Chase and Zay Flowers with T. Higgins. I think he could be as good as T. Higgins, and if not better, having that clear alpha number 2 role. The argument people get excited about is that, Zay Flowers has had some great finishes because he's had some, big volume games, but he's never scored a lot of touchdowns every year. I have no reason to believe this is going to be the year where he starts scoring touchdowns. That's my take.
Yeah, I don't see a huge difference. And then a player that we're higher on a little bit, that's a little bit past this, is Mike Evans. He's consensus Fantasy Pro ranked 26. We have him at 22. It's not a gigantic jump, but Mike Evans, even at a million years old, he, in theory, should provide San Francisco with an elite wide receiver option. We've seen elite wide receiver options turn into really good fantasy seasons. As long as Kyle Shanahan's there, you have to imagine that these guys are going to produce. Mike Evans, of course, having injuries like all the last 3 seasons and then going into the Shanahan system is really, really spooky. I get it. But
I see him as a diet version of Devontae Adams in the Rams last year. Maybe a little bit older, injury concerns, less of a red zone threat, but still a red zone threat, more target competition, but still a prolific offense. And this veteran coming in is exciting.
Yep. And I think those are the other big jumps. There's a few other names on here that may not be that surprising. Malik Neighbors we have lower than 15, but we're actually higher on consensus for injury purposes.
If the news didn't come out of him likely starting the season on the PUP and that late knee surgery, he would be closer to like my 9 or 10, maybe even higher than that. If the ACL tear never happened or if it was full recovery, he'd be like number 5 for me. There's just too many. He could be a great pick and win you some weeks later in the season, but I really do like where he's going now. I think he could be a value if he's not in that high end wide receiver 2 range, like 4th round. That's worth a risk for me, but it's hard
My
to.
ideal thing with Malik would be for us to find out that he's going to miss 4 weeks, and so he drops to like round 6 or 7, and then you get to hold on to
Yeah,
him there.
it's hard. I want to be a higher though. I do.
Yeah, yeah. And Willie, are there any other wide receivers you specifically want to bring up here?
No, not really. I think that Devontae Adams is just outside my top 15. Obviously, he had a great year last year. He got injured. He still led the league in touchdowns after even missing a few games. I don't see that happening again. But two things here. I don't think he's going to fall off a cliff. I think he's still going to be that red zone weapon because they didn't bring in competition. And if Puka does miss time, Devontae Adams, that's it. That's enough reason for upside there for me. So
Yeah, he's an older player that I don't think that you should discount.
yeah,
If he slides for whatever reason, just scoop him up.
yeah,
He led the league in touchdowns, and like while that's unlikely to happen twice in a row, like my level of surprise if it did happen twice in a row would be very low, also because they saw a winning strategy and it just didn't quite get them to the Super Bowl. Like you tell me, okay, on offense we're going to do all the same things, and on defense we've added Aaron Donald and
yeah,
Myles Garrett. Yeah, I get it. That's better.
yeah.
Why mess with it?
run it back. Like even if he finishes top 10 in touchdowns and not number one, that's still where he's going at value wise. So I'll take
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Okay, agreed. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean that's consensus is pretty close for most of these guys. I'm really excited.
Yeah, no, and we'll have more episodes talking about not necessarily just wide receivers in specific, but like sleeper picks, late value picks, etc. So you'll get more talk about wide receivers. This is just your kind of primer on here's the top people, here's what I think about them. And of course, with that said, our next episode is going to be our top 15 running backs. So if you dug this, then come check out our running back talk. It'll be maybe different, maybe the same. You'll find out when you hear it, and we'll have some more information for you. Until then, Willie, thanks for talking with me about fantasy football.
Heck yeah,
And Doink out.
Doink out.